dying puppy lay frozen in the snow, his fragile body slowly surrendering to the bitter cold as darkness fell across the wilderness. Abandoned and alone, his whimpers grew fainter with each passing minute. But nature had a stunning twist in store, one that defies everything we thought we knew about predator and prey. What happened next wasn't just unexpected, it was impossible. A wild fox, a natural enemy, would make a decision that challenges the very laws of the wild. A small bundle of fur trembled violently in the deepening snow. This 8-week-old puppy, barely old enough to be away from his mother, had been callously dumped on a rural back road miles from any shelter. As the sun began to set, temperatures plummeted to 20 below zero. With each labored breath, a small cloud formed in front of his nose, growing fainter by the minute. His once playful eyes now glazed with frost, his tiny paws red and swollen from the cold. He had stopped trying to dig himself out hours ago. He was literally freezing to death before our eyes, recounted the wildlife photographer who later discovered what happened. In those conditions, a puppy that size shouldn't have lasted more than an hour. But this puppy had already endured 5 hours in the killing cold. His body temperature had dropped dangerously low, his heartbeat slowing to a faint, irregular rhythm. As night fully enveloped the landscape, the puppy closed his eyes for what should have been the final time. But as darkness fell completely, something moved in the shadows. Something that should have meant death for the helpless pup. A flash of russet fur appeared at the edge of the clearing, eyes gleaming in the moonlight. A wild fox, lean, hungry, and perfectly adapted to the brutal winter, had caught the scent of vulnerability. Her pointed ears twitched forward as she detected the puppy's fading heartbeat. The frost-laden air carried the unmistakable scent of weakness, a signal that has triggered predatory instincts in foxes for thousands of generations. Wildlife experts would later explain that foxes are opportunistic predators who rarely pass up an easy meal, especially during the harsh winter months when food is scarce. By all natural laws, this encounter should have ended only one way. The predator-prey relationship is one of nature's most fundamental dynamics, an unwritten contract as old as time itself. The fox approached cautiously, her paws making almost no sound as they compressed the fresh snow. She circled the motionless puppy, her movements calculated and precise. Steam rose from her nostrils in the frigid air as she sniffed at his frozen form, her breath momentarily warming his ice-crusted fur. The puppy, too weak to move, couldn't even muster a whimper of fear. His tiny body had already begun to shut down, conserving what little warmth remained in his core. Local wildlife biologist Dr. Elena Korvich would later note, "What we expect in these situations is straightforward. Predation. A fox finding a helpless, dying animal represents a low-energy hunting opportunity. Exactly what winter survival demands. Then something extraordinary happened. Something that would baffle scientists and wildlife behaviorists for years to come, challenging the very foundations of what we understand about animal behavior and interspecies interactions. Instead of seeing prey, the fox seemed to recognize something else in the dying puppy. Perhaps it was the similarity to her own young kits, or some deeper instinct that transcended the natural order. Maybe it was something in the puppy's scent, or the particular way his small body curled against the cold. Something that triggered a maternal response rather than a predatory one. Whatever the reason, she made a choice that defied explanation. With gentle movements, the fox nudged the puppy with her nose, prodding him as if testing for life. Her whiskers brushed against his frozen fur, detecting the faintest tremor of a heartbeat. Then she did something astonishing. She curled her warm body around the freezing puppy, wrapping her bushy tail over him like a blanket of russet fur. Her body temperature, naturally higher than that of domestic dogs, began to radiate into the puppy's frozen form. In my 30 years studying wild canid behavior, I've never documented anything remotely like this, remarked Dr. James Thornton, who would later analyze the photographic evidence. This goes beyond anomalous behavior. It's revolutionary in terms of how we understand interspecies compassion. Throughout the night, as temperatures continued to plummet and the moon traced its arc across the star-filled sky, the fox remained vigilant. Occasionally, she would reposition herself, always keeping the puppy enveloped in her warmth. She licked his face and paws, stimulating circulation in a way that mimicked how she would care for her own kits. Each gentle lick helped remove ice crystals from his fur. Each shared moment of body heat fought against the killing cold. What happened next would challenge everything we thought we knew about the laws of the wild and force us to reconsider the boundaries of compassion in the animal kingdom. As the first pale light of dawn broke across the eastern sky, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold, the remarkable night vigil continued. The fox remained curled protectively around the puppy, her russet fur contrasting starkly against the pristine white snow. Frost had formed delicate crystalline patterns on her outer coat, evidence of the brutal cold she had endured throughout the night without seeking shelter. Incredibly, the puppy was still alive, his tiny chest now rising and falling in a stronger rhythm than before, each breath sending small clouds into the frigid morning air. Wildlife photographer Marcus Erickson had spent the night in his blind half a mile away, hoping to capture images of nocturnal predators in their natural hunting patterns. He had endured the biting cold for hours, his fingers nearly numb despite his specialized gloves, all for the chance to document the harsh realities of winter survival. As he began his morning trek back to his vehicle, stamping his feet to restore circulation, he spotted the unusual silhouette through his telephoto lens, a splash of orange-red against the endless white. At first, I thought I was hallucinating from the cold. Erickson would later recall in his viral blog post that would eventually crash his website from traffic overload. A fox and what looked like a domestic puppy, curled together like litter mates. I've documented wildlife for 20 years across 6 continents, and I've never seen anything that defies natural behavior so completely. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped my camera. Moving with the practiced stealth of an experienced wildlife photographer, Erickson crept closer, his snowshoes making soft crunching sounds despite his careful approach. He captured frame after frame of the unprecedented scene, adjusting his settings frantically to account for the challenging lighting conditions of early dawn. The fox, alert to his presence, raised her head defensively, but didn't abandon her charge. Her amber eyes locked with Erickson's, conveying what he could only describe as a fierce protectiveness that transcended species boundaries. There was intelligence in that gaze, a clear communication that I was being watched and assessed, Erickson noted in his subsequent interview with National Geographic. But what struck me most was that she didn't flee. Preservation of her own life took second place to whatever bond had formed with this puppy. It was as if she was calculating exactly how much of a threat I posed, and whether she needed to move them both to safety. The morning air was so still that Erickson could hear the soft huffs of the fox's breath from his position. Birds began to stir in the distant trees, their songs creating a surreal soundtrack to the unfolding drama. The landscape itself seemed to hold its breath, as if nature itself was witnessing something unprecedented. As the sun climbed higher, warming the frigid landscape and casting long blue shadows across the snow, something even more remarkable occurred. The fox began to nudge the puppy, gently at first, then with more insistence. She nipped lightly at his ears, a behavior fox mothers use to encourage their kits to rise and move. She circled him, pushing with her nose against his side, then returned to lick his face with methodical determination. It was clearly deliberate care, Erickson would write. Not random or instinctual, but purposeful rehabilitation. She would nudge, wait to observe his response, then adjust her approach accordingly. The level of assessment and adaptation I witnessed suggests cognitive processes we rarely attribute to wild animals. Impossibly, the puppy responded. First with a weak twitch that was barely perceptible, then with a more deliberate movement of his head. His small pink tongue emerged to lick his muzzle, a sign of returning vitality that seemed miraculous given his condition just hours before. The night of shared warmth had pulled him back from the precipice of certain death. His eyes, which had been crusted shut with ice, now blinked open, revealing dark pupils that contracted in the growing daylight. Dr. Nadia Williams, veterinary specialist in animal behavior at Cornell University, would later review Erickson's photographs and extensive video footage and note, "What we're seeing here challenges our fundamental understanding of interspecies dynamics. This fox exhibited classic nurturing behaviors typically reserved for offspring. The grooming, the protective posture, the encouragement to move. These are all maternal behaviors being directed at what should be considered prey. It forces us to reconsider the complexity of cognition and emotion in species we've often underestimated." Over the next hour, Erickson documented what can only be described as physical therapy administered by the fox. She continued to stimulate the puppy with gentle nudges and licks, encouraging movement and alertness. She would move a short distance away, then make soft vocalizations, sounds typically used by vixen to call their kits. When the puppy failed to follow, she would return and begin the process again, displaying remarkable patience. The sun had fully cleared the horizon, casting a golden glow across the snow when the breakthrough happened. The puppy, after numerous encouraged attempts, finally managed to stand on wobbly legs. His first steps were uncertain, his balance precarious, but he was moving under his own power. Erickson described feeling tears freeze on his cheeks in the morning cold as he witnessed this moment of triumph. "I was witnessing something that shouldn't have been possible," he wrote in the journal entry that would later be included in his award-winning book. A wild predator had not only spared a vulnerable creature, but had actively worked through the night to save its life. Everything I thought I knew about nature's harsh realities was being rewritten before my eyes. In that moment, I understood that the boundaries we create between species, between wild and domestic, between instinct and choice, they're far more permeable than we've ever acknowledged. Professor Elijah Montgomery, evolutionary biologist from Oxford University, would later comment on the footage. "This incident forces us to confront our limited understanding of animal cognition. We've built entire scientific paradigms around the idea that animals operate primarily on instinct, particularly regarding predator-prey relationships. But here we have evidence suggesting conscious choice that overrides biological imperatives. It's not just fascinating, it's paradigm-shifting. What would happen next would challenge not only our understanding of animal behavior, but also raise profound questions about the nature of compassion itself. Questions that would ripple through the scientific community and touch hearts worldwide. The story of the fox and the puppy was just beginning. And as the sun continued to rise on that winter morning, neither Erickson nor the subjects of his photographs could possibly know how their intertwined fates would unfold in the hours and days to come. By mid-morning, the temperature had risen just enough to soften the snow's crust. Sunlight filtered through the bare branches of birch and aspen trees, casting dappled patterns across the pristine white landscape. The fox, seemingly satisfied with the puppy's improved condition, made a decision that would further astonish observers. She stood, stretched her lithe body, first extending her front legs while arching her back downward, then stretching her hind legs one at a time in a characteristic canid awakening ritual. She shook her fur, sending small crystals of ice sparkling in the winter light, then began to move away from their overnight sanctuary, stopping after a few paces to look back at the puppy with an expectant gaze. Marcus Erickson, who had been documenting the entire encounter from his increasingly uncomfortable position behind a fallen log, held his breath. His fingers, numb despite his specialized photographer's gloves, gripped his camera tightly. It was a pivotal moment, he would later write in his field journal. Would she abandon him now that he was stronger? Or was I about to witness something even more extraordinary? I found myself silently urging the puppy to follow, as if my thoughts could somehow bridge the species divide. The puppy, still unsteady but remarkably revitalized compared to his near-death state the previous night, attempted to follow his unlikely guardian. His first steps were clumsy, his small paws punching through the snow crust with little popping sounds that carried in the still winter air. He stumbled, fell, and struggled back up, his determination evident in every labored movement. The fox waited patiently, returning occasionally to circle the puppy when he seemed to lose momentum or direction. She would make soft, chittering sounds, vocalizations typically reserved for fox kits, that seemed to provide encouragement. The level of communication between them was uncanny, noted Dr. Sophia Chen, specialist in canid behavior at the University of Michigan, who would later analyze Erickson's extensive footage. The fox modulated her pace precisely to the puppy's capabilities, never moving too far ahead. She used specific vocalizations that wild foxes typically employ only with their offspring. This suggests not just empathy, but an ability to assess another species' physical limitations and adapt accordingly. It's as if she recognized his vulnerability and adjusted her own behavior to accommodate it. A sophisticated cognitive process we rarely attribute to wild animals. Erickson followed at a respectful distance, his camera continuously capturing what was becoming one of the most remarkable wildlife stories ever documented. His own journey was challenging. Maintaining enough distance to avoid disrupting the natural behavior while staying close enough to document it required all his skill as a wildlife photographer. He stumbled several times, once nearly dropping his primary camera into a snowdrift. The cold was penetrating his layers of specialized clothing, and hunger gnawed at him. He had not anticipated spending so many hours in the field, and had consumed his emergency rations during the night. There was never a question of leaving, he would later tell National Geographic. I was physically uncomfortable, yes, but I was witnessing something that might happen once in a century, if ever. Nothing could have dragged me away from documenting this story. The odd pair moved slowly through the winter landscape, the fox clearly leading them on a deliberate path. She seemed to choose routes that would be easier for the puppy to navigate, avoiding deeper snowdrifts and seeking areas where the forest canopy had prevented heavy snow accumulation. Occasionally, she would disappear briefly into the underbrush, only to reappear moments later, as if scouting the path ahead. By tracking their route using GPS coordinates embedded in Erickson's photographs, wildlife experts would later determine that the fox was heading toward her den, a journey of nearly 2 miles through difficult terrain. For a healthy adult fox, this would be a simple commute. For a weakened puppy barely the size of a house cat, it seemed an impossible distance. What we observed challenges everything we know about interspecies relationships, remarked wildlife biologist Dr. James Harrington when presented with the evidence. The fox was making a conscious choice to bring another predator's offspring into her territory, into her home. This defies not only our understanding of predator-prey dynamics, but also territorial behavior. Foxes are typically highly territorial and protective of their dens, especially from other canids who might represent competition or threat. The journey was arduous. Several times the puppy appeared too exhausted to continue, his small body trembling with exertion, his breaths coming in rapid pants that formed small clouds in the cold air. Each time, the fox employed different strategies to encourage him, sometimes waiting patiently, her amber eyes fixed on him with what Erickson could only describe as concern, other times returning to nudge him forward with gentle prods of her muzzle. Occasionally, even digging shallow depressions in the snow, where the puppy could rest briefly, sheltered from the wind. During one such rest period, the fox disappeared into the forest, leaving Erickson concerned that she had finally abandoned her charge. "My heart sank," he recalled. "I thought perhaps reality had finally reasserted itself, and nature's usual rules were back in play." But 15 minutes later, she returned carrying something in her mouth. A small rodent, freshly caught. In another extraordinary display of caretaking, she dropped the prey in front of the puppy. Provisioning behavior directed at another species is exceedingly rare, explained comparative psychologist Dr. Richard Thornton. We occasionally see it in captivity between species that have been raised together, but documentation in the wild is virtually non-existent. It represents a significant expenditure of energy on behalf of another species, energy that by all evolutionary logic should be reserved for oneself or one's direct offspring. The puppy, driven by hunger and instinct, attempted to consume the offering, though his domesticated background meant he struggled with the raw prey. The fox watched attentively, and when it became clear the puppy was having difficulty, she did something even more remarkable. She began to tear smaller pieces from the catch, effectively processing the food to make it more manageable for her adoptee. Around noon, after covering perhaps half a mile of their journey, they encountered their first major obstacle, a narrow stream, partially frozen, but with a channel of flowing water about 3 feet across. The water moved swiftly, dark and forbidding against the white landscape. Steam rose from its surface, where the slightly warmer water met the freezing air. For the fox, with her experience and agility, it was a simple leap. For the puppy, it represented an impassable barrier. What happened next left even seasoned wildlife experts speechless when they reviewed the footage. The fox paced along the bank, her head low, clearly assessing the situation. She tested several potential crossing points, placing her paws on the ice edge, then backing away when it cracked. Then, in a behavior never before documented in wild foxes, she began to use her paws and muzzle to push snow toward the water, creating a crude but functional bridge across the narrowest section. Tool use among canids is extremely rare, explained Dr. Elena Vasiliev of the International Wildlife Behavior Institute after studying the footage. What makes this case remarkable is not just the tool use itself, but the fact that it was done for the benefit of another species. This suggests a level of cognitive empathy previously undocumented in wild foxes. She recognized the puppy's limitation, identified it as a problem to be solved, and then implemented a solution using environmental modification. That's multiple levels of abstract thinking. The process took nearly 40 minutes, during which the fox worked methodically, pushing snow with her front paws, packing it down with her body weight, and occasionally testing its stability. Once her makeshift bridge was complete, the fox demonstrated its use, crossing carefully while looking back at the puppy. After several tentative approaches and retreats, the puppy finally followed, his tiny body trembling with the effort but successfully reaching the other side. The fox greeted him with what appeared to be enthusiasm, circling him and touching noses in a behavior typically seen between bonded canids. Erickson, who had captured the entire sequence, later described it as, "The moment I realized I was documenting something that would change our understanding of animal cognition forever. I've photographed rare species, predation events, and natural phenomena across the globe. But nothing has affected me as profoundly as watching that fox solve a problem for the benefit of another species. It forces us to reconsider where we draw the line between instinct and intelligence, between human and animal cognition." As the afternoon wore on, the unlikely pair continued their journey through the winter wilderness. The sun began its early winter descent, casting long blue shadows across the snow and bathing the landscape in golden light. Perfect conditions for photography, which Erickson exploited to capture images that would later win him the Wildlife Photographer of the Year award. The puppy's stamina was improving, his movements becoming more coordinated with each passing hour. The fox continued her patient guidance, adapting her pace to his capabilities, waiting when necessary, encouraging when possible. Their intertwined tracks told a story of improbable connection, a testament to nature's capacity to surprise even its most dedicated observers. What we're seeing here isn't just unusual behavior, noted ethologist Dr. Maria Konikova after reviewing the documentation. It's a complete inversion of expected patterns. This fox has essentially adopted a member of a competing species, one that, in evolutionary terms, represents a threat to her resources and territory. The traditional explanatory frameworks of evolutionary biology simply don't account for this kind of behavior. It suggests dimensions of animal cognition and emotion that we've been systematically underestimating. As the afternoon light began to fade and temperatures started to drop once more, Erickson noticed a change in the fox's behavior. Her movements became more purposeful, her pauses less frequent. She seemed to be hurrying, perhaps aware of the approaching darkness and the dangers it might bring. There was a palpable sense of urgency, Erickson noted, as if she understood that they needed to reach shelter before nightfall. It reinforced my impression that I was witnessing not just random behavior, but deliberate, planned action with awareness of future conditions. What awaited them at the fox's den would prove even more astonishing, challenging our most fundamental assumptions about the boundaries between wild and domestic, instinct and choice, survival and compassion. As the unlikely pair crested a small rise, the fox's den finally came into view, and with it, a new chapter in this extraordinary saga was about to begin. The fox's den was nestled in the protective roots of an ancient oak tree that had partially fallen during some long-ago storm. Its massive root system, now exposed on one side, created a natural fortress of earth and wood. Decades of wind and weather had sculpted the surrounding terrain into gentle undulations, providing natural drainage during spring thaws while offering multiple escape routes, essential for any fox family's survival. Years of digging had expanded the space beneath into a complex of tunnels and chambers, a masterpiece of vulpine architecture hidden from predators and the elements alike. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the approach to this woodland sanctuary, illuminating particles of dust and pollen that drifted lazily in the golden light. Small birds flitted among the nearby branches, their chirps and calls creating a natural symphony that seemed to welcome the travelers. The snow here was thinner, partially melted away by the heat retained in the massive tree roots and the southern exposure of the small clearing. As they approached this sanctuary, the fox's behavior shifted subtly. Her ears pricked forward, her steps became more deliberate, and she paused frequently to scan their surroundings and test the air. Her tail, which had been held in a relaxed position during most of their journey, now raised slightly, a signal of increased alertness that Erickson recognized from years of fox observation. She moved with the heightened awareness of a creature returning to her most vulnerable place, the home where her offspring waited. Erickson, maintaining his distance but still close enough to document the unfolding drama, recognized the heightened alertness of a mother approaching her den. He settled behind a fallen log approximately 40 yards away, using his longest telephoto lens to capture the scene without disturbing it. His hands, stiff from cold and fatigue, trembled slightly as he adjusted his camera settings to compensate for the fading light. There was a palpable tension in her body language, he would later write in his field journal, which would become the basis for his best-selling book, Boundaries Crossed, The Fox and the Puppy. I realized she might have kits waiting, which made her decision to bring the puppy into her territory even more extraordinary. She was potentially introducing a competitor to her own offspring, a choice that defies conventional understanding of wildlife behavior. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just unusual behavior, it was revolutionary in terms of our understanding of wildlife cognition. The puppy, exhausted from the journey, but still gamely following his guardian, seemed to sense the significance of their arrival. His movements, which had been increasingly coordinated throughout their trek, now showed signs of renewed energy. His ears, previously drooping with fatigue, perked forward in an expression of curiosity. His tail, which had remained mostly tucked throughout their trek, now gave a tentative wag. Despite his exhaustion, his eyes remained fixed on the fox as she approached the main entrance to her den, a well-worn opening partially concealed by overhanging roots and dried grasses. The entrance itself bore the marks of generations of fox habitation. Smoothed earth at the threshold, tufts of fur caught on protruding roots, small bones and feathers scattered nearby from previous meals. A careful observer might have noticed the multiple exit holes partially hidden by underbrush. Emergency escapes essential for fox survival in a world full of predators. What happened next would challenge the foundations of wildlife biology and force a re-evaluation of interspecies relationships in the natural world. The fox paused at the entrance, her body tensing slightly as she lifted her muzzle to emit a soft, trilling vocalization, a sound foxes typically use to greet their kits. The sound carried clearly in the still afternoon air, a gentle announcement of her return. She entered the den, her russet tail disappearing into the darkness like a flame extinguished. The puppy remained outside, shifting nervously from paw to paw in the fading afternoon light, his breath creating small clouds that dissipated quickly in the cold air. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Erickson held his position, barely breathing, his camera trained on the den entrance. The forest around them continued its everyday activities. A woodpecker drummed rhythmically in the distance. A squirrel chattered angrily from a nearby branch, unaware it was witnessing a moment that would redefine our understanding of wildlife behavior. When she re-emerged, she was not alone. Following close behind her came 3 fox kits, approximately 8 weeks old judging by their size and development. They emerged cautiously, blinking in the light, their movements displaying the characteristic mix of caution and curiosity that defines young foxes. Their russet fur was still downy, their faces bearing the distinctive innocence of youth. They approached the puppy with characteristic vulpine curiosity, heads low, steps cautious but deliberate. The introduction was like nothing I've ever witnessed in wildlife observation, Erickson noted, his camera capturing every nuance of the interaction. The mother fox positioned herself between her kits and the puppy, not to separate them, but almost as if she was making a formal introduction. Her body language was neither defensive nor aggressive. She maintained a relaxed posture that communicated safety to both her kits and the newcomer. It was a deliberate social facilitation that showed remarkable cognitive sophistication. The kits circled the puppy, their noses working overtime to process this strange new scent. Their movements were synchronized in the way of siblings who move through the world as a unit, each taking courage from the other's boldness. One bold youngster, distinguishable by a white-tipped ear that caught the light, approached directly, touching noses with the newcomer in a traditional canid greeting. The puppy, despite being roughly the same size as the fox kits, but of a completely different species, responded with remarkably appropriate social signals. Lowering his head slightly, licking submissively at the air, his tail making small, tentative wags. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, who specializes in canid communication at the University of British Columbia, would later analyze this footage frame by frame. What we're seeing here is sophisticated cross-species communication. Both the puppy and the fox kits are reading and responding to each other's social cues appropriately, despite having no previous exposure to each other's species. This suggests an underlying grammar of canid communication that transcends species boundaries. A universal language, if you will. The puppy's submission signals and the kit's greeting behavior are perfectly matched, as if they've been reading from the same social playbook despite their different evolutionary paths. The white-eared kit, apparently satisfied with this initial exchange, took a bold step closer and began sniffing more intensely at the puppy's face and ears. The puppy remained still, allowing this inspection with remarkable patience for a young animal. The other kits, emboldened by their siblings' courage, moved in closer, their collective curiosity overcoming any initial wariness. This mutual investigation phase is particularly significant, Dr. Montgomery would later explain. What we don't see is equally important as what we do see. There's no hackle-raising, no growling, no defensive posturing from either side. The absence of threat displays suggests an immediate recognition of non-threat status, which is extraordinary given that these are essentially strangers from different species. After the initial investigation, something even more remarkable occurred. The white-eared kit initiated play behavior, dropping into the characteristic play bow posture universal among canids, front legs extended and rear end raised, tail wagging enthusiastically. This universal invitation to play transcended species boundaries as clearly as any shared language. The puppy, despite his exhaustion, hesitated only momentarily before responding in kind, lowering his front end in a slightly clumsy version of the same bow. Within moments, the clearing in front of the den became the stage for an impromptu play session between species that should, by all conventional understanding, be strangers at best and adversaries at worst. The play itself followed patterns familiar to anyone who has observed young canids: chase sequences, gentle wrestling, play biting directed at legs and tails, dramatic falls and recoveries. What made it extraordinary was the cross-species nature of the interaction. The fox kits, with their slightly more agile movements and natural athleticism, would dart around the puppy, who responded with a slightly more robust play style of domestic dogs. When the puppy would occasionally play too roughly, a paw landing too heavily, or a play bite delivered with too much enthusiasm, the kits would emit small yips that served as communication rather than distress signals. This calibration of play intensity is fascinating, noted Dr. Jonathan Way, animal behaviorist at Stanford University, after reviewing the footage. Play requires trust, energy expenditure, and vulnerability. For these different species to engage in play immediately upon meeting indicates an extraordinary level of social recognition and acceptance. But even more impressive is how quickly they established appropriate play boundaries. When the puppy plays too roughly, the kits provide feedback, and remarkably, the puppy adjusts his behavior in response. This demonstrates not just play behavior, but sophisticated social learning across species lines. The mother fox watched attentively from a slight rise near the den entrance, her posture alert but relaxed. Occasionally, she would intervene when the play became too rough or when the puppy seemed overwhelmed, stepping smoothly into the play circle with quiet authority. Her interventions were minimal but effective. A gentle nudge here, a soft vocalization there, just enough to maintain order without suppressing the important social interaction taking place. Her behavior was consistent with how fox mothers supervise play among their own kits, maintaining safety while encouraging social development. The mother's supervisory role reveals complex social cognition, observed Dr. Way. She's not just allowing this unusual interaction. She's actively facilitating it while maintaining boundaries. This suggests she recognizes the puppy as a legitimate social partner for her kits, but also acknowledges his different species status and the potential need for guidance. Its parenting behavior extended across species lines, something we've documented in captivity, but rarely observed in completely wild settings. As the play session continued, subtle changes became apparent. The initial tentativeness gave way to more fluid interactions. The puppy, gaining confidence, began initiating play sequences of his own rather than merely responding to the kit's invitations. The kits, in turn, began incorporating the puppy into their existing play patterns, creating a seamless group dynamic that belied their different origins. One particularly poignant moment, captured perfectly in Erickson's photographs, showed the puppy and two kits collapsed together in an exhausted heap, panting happily, their bodies intertwined without regard for species boundaries. The third kit, the white-eared one who had first approached the puppy, stood playfully over them, as if claiming victory in their game. That image became the most requested from my entire portfolio, Erickson would later recall during his TED Talk on the experience. I think it resonates because it captures something we all instinctively recognize but rarely see demonstrated so purely, that the connections between living beings can transcend the categories we impose on them. In that moment, they weren't fox and dog. They were simply young canids sharing the universal joy of play. As twilight deepened into dusk, painting the clearing in deepening shades of blue and purple, the mother fox's behavior changed again. She straightened, ears alert to the changing sounds of the forest as nocturnal creatures began to stir. With a soft but authoritative bark, she interrupted the play session, which had naturally begun to wind down as energy reserves depleted. She herded her kits back toward the den entrance with gentle nudges and quiet vocalizations. The universal language of mothers calling their children home as darkness falls. The kits responded immediately, their ingrained response to their mother's authority overriding their interest in their new playmate. They moved toward the den entrance, looking back occasionally at the puppy, who stood uncertainly at the edge of the clearing. The mother fox paused at the entrance, her three kits now clustered around her legs. She looked back at the puppy, who remained where the play had ended, his body language communicating uncertainty and a touch of anxiety. For a long moment, fox and puppy regarded each other across the clearing, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light. Then, with a soft vocalization that Ericsson's directional microphone barely captured, a sound somewhere between a whine and a trill, distinct from her communications with her kits, she seemed to invite him to follow. The message, though impossible to translate directly, was clear enough in intent that even Ericsson, watching through his viewfinder, felt its pull. The puppy hesitated, taking one step forward, then stopping, caught between his domesticated nature and the wild invitation before him. The fox, displaying yet another level of cross-species understanding, returned to him, gently nudged him toward the den with her muzzle, and then led the way back to the entrance where her kits waited. After one final moment of hesitation, a pause that seemed to represent the threshold between two worlds, the puppy followed her into the darkness of the den. The kits disappeared after them, and the clearing fell silent save for the emerging chorus of evening insects and the distant call of a hunting owl. I sat there in the gathering darkness, completely stunned. Ericsson would later recall in interviews. A domestic puppy had just been accepted into a wild fox family. Everything I thought I knew about wildlife behavior, about the boundaries between wild and domestic, about the limits of cross-species bonding, everything had just been upended. I felt like I had witnessed something almost sacred. A moment when nature revealed a truth we've been too blinded by our categories and preconceptions to see. As full night fell, the stars emerging one by one in the clear winter sky, Ericsson remained at his observation post, reluctant to break the spell of what he had witnessed. The temperature dropped rapidly, the cold intensifying with the darkness. But he stayed, his camera now set for night photography, on the slim chance the new family might emerge again. They did not. But something else happened that added yet another layer to the extraordinary day. As Ericsson sat in contemplative silence, other inhabitants of the forest began to emerge. A pair of raccoons foraging along the edge of the clearing, a barn owl swooping silently overhead. And most remarkably, a young deer that stepped cautiously into the open space, its breath clouding in the frigid air. It was as if the normal boundaries of the forest had been temporarily suspended, Ericsson wrote. The usual wariness between species, the careful separation of activities in time and space that characterizes wild communities, it all seemed relaxed, as if the extraordinary acceptance I had witnessed between fox and puppy had somehow rippled outward, creating a momentary zone of unusual tolerance. Finally, as the cold became too intense to bear, and his equipment batteries began to fail in the frigid temperatures, Ericsson reluctantly packed his gear and began the long trek back to his vehicle. His mind raced with the implications of what he had witnessed. He knew that his documentation of this extraordinary relationship would raise as many questions as it answered. Questions about cognition, about empathy, about the fundamental nature of the bonds that connect living beings. As I made my way through the darkened forest, I kept replaying the day's events in my mind. He later wrote, "I've been a wildlife photographer for over 20 years, and I've witnessed remarkable things. Predator-prey interactions, rare mating displays, complex social behaviors. But nothing had prepared me for this. I felt like I had glimpsed something profound about the nature of connection itself. Something that transcended our neat biological categories and spoke to possibilities we've barely begun to understand." What he couldn't know, as he made his way through the darkened forest, his headlamp illuminating the path ahead while owls called hauntingly from the branches above, was that the story of the fox and the puppy was far from over. The den beneath the ancient oak would become the setting for a natural experiment without precedent. A test case for the plasticity of species behavior and the unexpected depths of cross-species connection. The scientific community, when presented with his evidence, would divide along predictable lines, some embracing the implications of what he had documented, others seeking conventional explanations that would preserve existing paradigms of animal behavior. The footage would be analyzed frame by frame, subjected to the scrutiny of experts in canid behavior, evolutionary biology, and comparative psychology. And the world, once it glimpsed the images he carried in his camera, would never see the boundaries between species quite the same way again. Social media would explode with the story. Traditional news outlets would feature it prominently, and ordinary people would find in it a parable for our times. A reminder that the categories we impose on the natural world are often more reflective of our limitations than nature's. As Erickson finally reached his vehicle, his body exhausted but his mind electrified by what he had witnessed, he carefully stored his precious memory cards in their protective case. They contained not just remarkable images, but a challenge to our understanding of the natural world. Evidence that compassion, curiosity, and connection might be forces more powerful and more universal than we had dared to imagine. The fox and the puppy slept that night in the warmth of the den, surrounded by the fox kits, their unlikely family unit sheltered from the winter cold. And something new had entered the world. A relationship that should not exist according to our understanding of wildlife behavior, yet undeniably did. What would unfold in the days and weeks to come would test the limits of this unprecedented bond, revealing depths of animal cognition that would forever change how we view the creatures with whom we share our planet. The following days revealed a remarkable process of integration as the puppy adapted to life in the fox den. Erickson, having reported his discovery to the university's wildlife biology department, returned with a small team of researchers who established a minimally invasive observation post at a respectful distance from the den. Their presence was carefully managed to avoid disrupting the extraordinary social experiment unfolding before them. The observation post itself was a marvel of modern wildlife research technology. A camouflaged blind constructed of materials designed to minimize scent dispersion, equipped with high-definition cameras featuring powerful zoom capabilities, directional microphones sensitive enough to capture even the softest vocalizations, and thermal imaging equipment to monitor activity during nighttime hours. The researchers worked in shifts, maintaining a continuous observation schedule that would yield an unprecedented data set on this remarkable cross-species adoption. "We designed our presence to be as ghost-like as possible," explained Dr. Rebecca Torres, the field research coordinator brought in to oversee the observation protocols. Every aspect of our setup was evaluated for potential impact on natural behavior. We used unscented materials, maintained strict downwind positioning, and established approach and departure protocols that minimized the chances of our human presence influencing what we were observing. This wasn't just about watching something extraordinary. It was about ensuring that our observation itself didn't alter the phenomenon we were studying. Dawn of the third day brought the first emergence of the expanded family. The sky had just begun to lighten, painting the eastern horizon in delicate shades of pink and gold, when the mother fox appeared at the den entrance. She paused there, her russet fur catching the first rays of sunlight, her keen senses surveying the surroundings before allowing her offspring, both biological and adopted, to follow. Her vigilance was that of any wild mother, thorough, patient, and methodical, her nose testing the air currents, ears swiveling to capture every sound, eyes scanning for the slightest movement that might signal danger. Satisfied that the morning presented no immediate threats, she made a soft chittering sound, the fox equivalent of an all-clear signal. Moments later, her 3 kits tumbled out of the den entrance, their energy seemingly undiminished by sleep, their playful shoving and nipping at each other, displaying the universal exuberance of young animals greeting a new day. Then, slightly hesitant but unmistakably part of the group, the puppy emerged. The research team collectively held their breath as they documented this moment through telephoto lenses and high-definition video. The puppy had visibly changed in just these few days. His movements were more confident, his coordination improved, and most strikingly, his behavior showed clear signs of mimicking his fox siblings. Where he had once moved with a somewhat clumsy gait typical of domestic puppies, he now displayed a more measured, deliberate way of walking. Lower to the ground, paws placed with greater precision, body held in a more streamlined posture reminiscent of his fox siblings. The speed of behavioral adaptation is unprecedented, noted Dr. Lydia Chen, the ethologist who joined Erickson's observation team. Her background in comparative canid behavior made her particularly qualified to assess the nuances of what they were witnessing. We're observing real-time behavioral plasticity that challenges our understanding of how firmly hardwired species-specific behaviors actually are. Traditional ethology has tended to categorize behaviors as either innate or learned. But what we're seeing suggests a far more dynamic interplay between genetic predispositions and environmental influences. This puppy is essentially rewriting portions of his behavioral code in response to his new social environment. The morning routine that unfolded before the researchers provided rich material for analysis. The puppy had begun moving with the characteristic low-to-ground stalking posture of a fox rather than the bouncier gait typical of domestic dogs. When the family engaged in their morning grooming ritual, an important social bonding activity among foxes, the puppy participated fully, both receiving grooming from the mother fox and his siblings and attempting, somewhat clumsily but with obvious intent, to provide reciprocal grooming, particularly to the white-eared kit who had been his first friend. Mutual grooming in canids serves multiple functions, Dr. Chen explained in her detailed field notes, which would later form the basis for a groundbreaking paper in the journal Behavioral Ecology. Beyond the obvious hygiene benefits, it reinforces social bonds, establishes and maintains hierarchy, and distributes group scent among family members. The puppy's participation in these rituals, and more importantly, the fox family's acceptance of his participation, indicates full social integration. He's not being treated as an outsider or tolerated guest, but as a legitimate family member with all the social rights and responsibilities that entails. Perhaps most fascinating was the emergence of what the research team termed hybrid communication, a developing language between species. The puppy's vocalizations had shifted away from typical domestic dog sounds toward the more varied repertoire of fox communication, incorporating higher-pitched yips and trills while retaining some elements of barking when excited. This vocal adaptation wasn't merely imitative. It appeared to be functional, with the fox family responding appropriately to his communications, and vice versa. He's essentially becoming bilingual, Dr. Chen explained in her field notes, retaining his native dog language while acquiring fox communication patterns. This suggests a level of social learning and vocal flexibility we've underestimated in canids. We've known that foxes and dogs share some baseline communication signals. The playbow, for instance, is nearly universal among canids. But the development of this hybrid vocal communication suggests much deeper communicative plasticity than previously documented. Dr. Mikhail Sorokin, a bioacoustician who joined the research team specifically to analyze these vocalizations, added further insights through spectrographic analysis. The puppy's vocalizations show a clear trajectory of change, he noted after analyzing recordings from consecutive days. The frequency range is shifting upward to match the higher-pitched communications typical of foxes, while certain rhythmic patterns characteristic of domestic dogs are being maintained. It's as if he's developing a Creole language, a new communication system that blends elements of both parent languages into something unique and functional for this specific social context. Feeding behaviors provided some of the most compelling evidence of adaptation. The mother fox continued to provision her unusual family, bringing small prey back to the den area. The research team documented her returning with everything from field mice and voles to an occasional rabbit, demonstrating hunting prowess that kept her mixed family well-nourished despite the additional mouth to feed. Initially, the puppy struggled with raw food, his domestic background evident in his tentative approach to fresh prey. Observation footage captured a remarkable scene. The mother fox pre-processing food for the puppy, tearing it into manageable pieces and even partially pre-chewing tougher portions, a behavior typically reserved for very young fox kits. This food processing behavior is particularly significant, noted nutritional ecologist Dr. Sarah Williams, who analyzed the feeding interactions. Wild canids typically begin weaning their young onto whole prey around 4 to 5 weeks of age, with minimal processing by the time they reach the age of these kits. The mother fox is clearly recognizing the puppy's different capabilities and adapting her parental care accordingly. She's not treating him as deficient or abnormal. She's simply meeting his needs with the same attentiveness she shows her biological offspring, just with different specific behaviors. More surprising still, by the end of the first week, the puppy had begun participating in the family's hunting activities. While not yet contributing to actual prey capture, he had learned to follow the specific stalking patterns of foxes and would position himself, somewhat clumsily but with obvious intent, as a blocker during coordinated hunting of small rodents. This role, while perhaps the simplest in the fox family's hunting strategy, nonetheless represented a significant adaptation from domestic dog behavior to wild fox hunting techniques. He's finding his role in the family hunting unit, observed wildlife biologist Dr. James Harrington, who spent 3 consecutive days analyzing the hunting behavior. Not trying to hunt like a domestic dog would, but specifically adapting to fox hunting strategies. This suggests he's not just mimicking behavior, but understanding its function and purpose. He's recognizing the goal, successful prey capture, and figuring out how he can contribute to that goal within the constraints of his abilities. That's sophisticated cognitive processing, not simple imitation. The fox kits, for their part, seem to have fully accepted their unusual sibling. The white-eared kit in particular had formed a special bond with the puppy, frequently initiating play and often sleeping pressed against him during the family's daytime rest periods. Researchers noted that this kit often acted as a behavioral bridge, demonstrating fox behaviors that the puppy would then attempt to copy. We're seeing a form of teaching behavior that hasn't been well documented in foxes before, noted cognitive ethologist Dr. Patricia Lundgren. The white-eared kit isn't just playing with the puppy. There's a pattern to their interactions that suggests deliberate demonstration, followed by opportunity for imitation. When the puppy successfully copies a behavior, the kit often engages in what appears to be reinforcement, increased play, social grooming, or other positive interactions. It's as if this young fox has intuitively developed a teaching methodology for cross-species communication. The play sessions between the puppy and the fox kits evolved over time, becoming more complex and incorporating more elements of fox-specific play. Where initial interactions had focused on simple chase and wrestling behaviors common to most young canids, later play sessions included the freeze and pounce sequence characteristic of fox play, mock ambushes from concealed positions, and even rudimentary prey sharing games that mirrored adult fox cooperative hunting behaviors. Play isn't just fun for young canids. It's practice for adult life. explained developmental psychologist Dr. Michael Rivera, who specialized in the relationship between play behavior and cognitive development. What we're seeing is the puppy being enculturated into fox society through play. He's learning not just how to move like a fox, but how to think like one, how to predict movement patterns, how to coordinate with others, how to use the environment strategically. These are sophisticated cognitive skills being transferred across species lines through the universal medium of play. As word of this extraordinary relationship spread through scientific circles, the observation team expanded to include specialists in comparative cognition and evolutionary biology. The implications of what they were witnessing extended far beyond a heartwarming animal story. They were observing evolution's plasticity in real time, challenging fundamental assumptions about the rigidity of species behavior. The research camp itself grew accordingly, though always with careful attention to minimizing impact on the fox family. Additional blinds were constructed at strategic locations along common travel routes the family used, allowing for observation of behavior beyond the immediate den area. Sophisticated camera traps with motion sensors were deployed at greater distances, creating a network of observation points that could capture behavior when the family ventured beyond direct observation range. What we're seeing isn't just unusual, it's revolutionary, stated Dr. Elena Vasquez, a cognitive ethologist who joined the research team in its second week. Her previous work on cognitive flexibility in canids made her particularly attuned to the significance of what they were witnessing. This puppy isn't just surviving in a fox family. He's thriving, adapting, and developing behaviors that bridge his domestic dog heritage with acquired fox behaviors. It suggests that the boundaries between wild and domestic canids are far more permeable than we've assumed. This has profound implications for our understanding of canid cognition, the process of domestication, and the potential for rewilding in certain contexts. The mother fox's behavior continued to defy conventional explanation. Her care for the puppy remained consistent with that shown to her biological offspring, with no signs of diminishment as the novelty wore off. If anything, researchers noted increased investment in his development, with more time spent demonstrating specific fox behaviors when the puppy struggled to acquire them naturally. We're observing what appears to be intentional teaching, Dr. Vasquez noted, after reviewing footage of the mother fox repeatedly demonstrating a particular pouncing technique to the puppy. She performs the behavior, waits for him to attempt it, then adjusts her demonstration based on his performance. When he struggles, she slows down the movement sequence. When he succeeds, she adds complexity. This suggests not just empathy, but theory of mind. She appears to understand that he perceives the world differently than her biological kits do, and she's adapting her teaching accordingly. By the end of the second week, trail cameras captured the puppy's first successful hunting contribution, helping to corner a field mouse that one of the kits then captured. The footage, which would later be viewed millions of times when released to the public, showed the puppy using a flanking maneuver he had observed the fox family employ numerous times, effectively cutting off the mouse's escape route and driving it toward the waiting kit. What happened next was even more remarkable. The footage showed the entire fox family engaging in what could only be described as celebration, with excited vocalizations, play bows, and energetic circling around the successful hunters. Most significantly, the mother fox allowed the puppy first access to the prey, despite not making the final capture. A significant honor in fox social structure that recognized his contribution to the group's success. She's not just accepting him, she's actively facilitating his success within the family unit, Dr. Harrington noted after analyzing this sequence frame by frame. This goes beyond tolerance or even adoption. She's investing in his development as if his success is as important to her as that of her biological offspring. From an evolutionary perspective, this is extraordinarily difficult to explain through conventional frameworks of kin selection or reciprocal altruism. She's expending energy and resources on an individual with whom she shares no genetic relationship, with no clear fitness benefit to herself or her biological offspring. Evolutionary biologist Dr. Thomas Reeves suggested that this behavior might offer insights into the early stages of dog domestication. What we might be witnessing is a window into the mechanisms that facilitated the earliest relationships between humans and proto-dogs. If wild canids possess this capacity for cross-species bonding and caretaking, it provides a potential evolutionary pathway for the development of the human-dog relationship that doesn't rely solely on human agency. Perhaps the earliest dogs weren't just wolves that humans tamed, but wolves that, like this mother fox, had the cognitive and emotional capacity to form bonds across species boundaries. As the observation continued into its third week, the researchers faced an ethical dilemma that prompted intense debate within the team. The puppy, clearly thriving in his adopted family, showed no signs of distress or desire to return to human contact. Yet his domestic origin raised questions about whether intervention was appropriate. Some team members argued that, as a domestic animal, he should be returned to human care. Others contended that his obvious well-being and integration into the fox family suggested that intervention would cause more harm than good. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, a veterinary ethicist brought in specifically to address these questions, framed the discussion in terms of competing ethical frameworks. We're balancing several ethical considerations here, she explained during a team meeting held in the main research tent, well away from the observation blinds. There's the welfare ethic, which asks us to consider what intervention would best serve this individual animal's well-being. There's the autonomy ethic, which suggests we should respect the apparent choices this animal is making about his preferred social group. There's the naturalness ethic, which might lead us to restore what some would consider the natural order by returning a domestic animal to domestic settings. And there's the knowledge ethic, which recognizes the unprecedented scientific value of observing this situation without interference. After considerable debate, facilitated by Dr. Montgomery and informed by daily welfare assessments conducted by the team's veterinarians, the research team decided that the scientific value of observing this unprecedented natural experiment, combined with the puppy's obvious well-being, justified continuing observation without interference. We established clear welfare criteria, Dr. Montgomery noted in the formal decision document. Any signs of malnutrition, injury, disease, or social rejection would trigger an intervention protocol. But in the absence of such indicators, and indeed, in the presence of strong positive welfare indicators such as play behavior, social bonding, and successful adaptation, the least harmful course appears to be continued observation with ongoing welfare assessment. This decision would prove fortunate, as the most remarkable developments were yet to come. As spring approached and the forest began to stir with new life, the fox family's behavior entered a new phase, one that would provide even more extraordinary insights into the adaptability of canid species and the depth of their social connections. The changing season brought new energy to the forest ecosystem. The first tender shoots of spring vegetation emerged through the melting snow, drawing herbivores from their winter shelters. This in turn created new hunting opportunities for the fox family, and the mother fox began leading her family on increasingly wide-ranging excursions, teaching hunting and survival skills appropriate to the approaching season of plenty. The research team expanded their observation network accordingly, deploying mobile observation units and additional camera traps to track these extended journeys. What they documented was a sophisticated educational process. The mother fox systematically introducing her mixed family to different hunting grounds, teaching them to recognize the signs of various prey species, and demonstrating specialized hunting techniques appropriate for each. "It's like watching a masterclass in predator ecology," remarked Dr. Harrington after reviewing footage of the mother fox teaching her family to hunt early spring frogs in a newly thawed pond margin. "She's not just showing them how to catch prey, she's teaching them to read the entire ecosystem, where to find specific food sources as the seasons change, how to approach different terrains, when to hunt, and when to conserve energy. It's a complete education in survival." The puppy, now moving with confidence through the forest, had developed a fascinating set of hybrid behaviors, combining the social attentiveness of domestic dogs with the stealth and precision of wild foxes. His hunting style was particularly distinctive, blending the persistent tracking approach typical of domestic hunting dogs with the patient stalking and pouncing techniques of foxes. "He's not becoming a fox, nor remaining fully a domestic dog," Dr. Chen observed after a full day tracking the family through a series of hunting expeditions. "He's developing into something unique, a bridge between worlds that we've always considered separate. And in doing so, he's revealing something profound about the underlying unity of canid cognition and social structures. Despite thousands of years of divergent evolution and human selective breeding, the fundamental architecture of canid behavior remains sufficiently flexible and compatible that this cross-species integration is possible." The puppy's relationship with the fox kits continued to deepen and evolve. What had begun as simple play had developed into complex social bonds with distinct characteristics for each kit. With the white-eared kit, his relationship was one of almost sibling-like closeness. They frequently slept curled together and engaged in the most elaborate play sessions. With the largest male kit, a more competitive relationship had emerged, with frequent wrestling matches and tests of strength that nonetheless remained within the boundaries of play. With the smallest female kit, he had developed what appeared to be a protective relationship, often positioning himself between her and potential threats during their explorations. "We're seeing the development of individualized social relationships," noted social cognition researcher Dr. Amanda Jeffries. "This isn't just generic social bonding. It's the formation of specific, personalized relationships with different qualities and interaction patterns. This level of social sophistication is something we associate with highly social mammals like primates, elephants, and cetaceans. Seeing it develop across species lines is particularly remarkable." One of the most unexpected developments came when the family encountered other foxes during their wider-ranging excursions. Rather than treating the puppy as an intruder or oddity, these other foxes, after initial caution, seemed to accept his presence as part of the family group. In one particularly remarkable encounter captured on film, an adult male fox who appeared to be the father of the kits returned to the family group after an extended absence. After greeting the mother fox and kits with typical fox social behaviors, he approached the puppy with obvious curiosity but no aggression. "What we witnessed wasn't just tolerance," Dr. Chen explained after analyzing this footage extensively. "The male fox engaged in active social recognition behaviors with the puppy. Scent investigation, followed by a greeting ritual that included facial contact and body positioning that mirrored how he greeted his biological offspring. It suggests that the mother fox's acceptance of the puppy somehow extended to her mate, perhaps through scent communication or some other signaling we don't fully understand. The male fox's integration into the family group added yet another dimension to the research. He participated in hunting and teaching activities, and notably, included the puppy in these interactions. On several occasions, researchers observed him demonstrating specific hunting techniques to the entire family group. with the puppy receiving the same attention and correction as the fox kits. The male's acceptance completes the picture of full family integration, Dr. Harrington noted. This isn't just a case of an unusual mother-child relationship. It's the complete incorporation of a different species into a wild fox family structure, with all family members adjusting their behaviors and expectations to accommodate the differences while maintaining functional family dynamics. As spring flowers began to emerge through the last patches of snow, carpeting the forest floor with delicate white trilliums and vibrant yellow marsh marigolds, the forest bore witness to this unprecedented family. A wild mother fox, her 3 growing kits, a returning father fox, and a domestic puppy who had found his place in a world where, by all conventional wisdom, he should never have belonged. The research team, now including representatives from major universities and wildlife conservation organizations around the world, continued their careful documentation of this extraordinary situation. The implications of what they were observing extended far beyond this single case, raising profound questions about behavioral plasticity, the cognitive capacities of wild animals, and the potential for cross-species cooperation in conservation contexts. What we're learning here could inform everything from captive breeding programs to wildlife rehabilitation to conservation strategies, noted Dr. Vasquez during an interview with National Geographic, which had sent a specialized documentary team to create a film about the research. If wild animals possess this capacity for behavioral flexibility and cross-species social bonding, it opens new possibilities for how we approach wildlife management and conservation. For the puppy, now growing into adolescence and developing a distinctive appearance that blended his domestic heritage with the lean, efficient physique of a wild fox, the future remained uncertain. Would he remain with his adopted family indefinitely? Would the approaching summer bring new challenges to this unprecedented arrangement? Would he eventually seek out human contact as he matured, drawn by the genetic legacy of thousands of years of domestication? The researchers could only continue to observe, document, and learn from this extraordinary natural experiment. What was already clear, however, was that this unlikely family had demonstrated something profound about the nature of bonds between living beings. That compassion, curiosity, and connection could transcend the boundaries humans had drawn between wild and domestic, between one species and another. Their story would continue to unfold, challenging our understanding of species boundaries and revealing the remarkable adaptability of life when compassion creates unexpected connections. For the researchers privileged to document this journey, it was becoming clear that they were witnessing not just an extraordinary exception to natural rules, but perhaps a glimpse into the deeper truth of how those rules had always worked. Through flexibility, adaptation, and connections that transcend the categories humans have imposed upon the natural world. As spring fully established itself in the forest, bringing new life and new possibilities, the fox family and their adopted member continued their daily life, hunting, playing, resting, and learning together in a harmony that defied explanation but inspired wonder in all who witnessed it. Their story, already remarkable, was still being written, one day at a time, in the ancient language of living beings finding their way together in a complex and beautiful world.